Hello and welcome to the Open Era Podcast. My name is Devang Desai. This week, Simon and I are off as the clay season begins in earnest. So we thought we would look back on one of our favorite clay episodes. It involves the 2010 French Open and Francesca Schiavone doing the damn thing. This match that we covered was requested by a dear friend of ours and Patreon subscriber Luke Paristi. And it was about someone who I think we have extremely soft spot in our hearts for in terms of her play style, the way she went about her game, the way she interacted with her peers, and the way she won this title. Francesca Schiavone is the last woman with a one-handed backhand to win a singles major, which seems pretty nuts when you think about it. But then again, it sort of makes sense. There were quite a few familiar faces involved in this tournament. Serena Williams, of course, who by losing in the quarterfinals guaranteed that there would be a new major champion. In fact, this was the first major since '79 in Australia where none of the semifinalists had previously won a major. And the first final since the 2004 tournament to feature two first-time major finalists, the other being Sam Stosur, of course. It's a fun episode of ours, fun one to look back on. I mean, the French Open, love it or hate it, I think it has a penchant for producing drama and for producing wonderful storylines in terms of people winning maybe that we wouldn't expect to at the start of the tournament. We hope you enjoy this look back, this open era look back as we head to the 2010 French Open, and we'll talk to you folks soon next week. Hello and welcome to the Open Air Podcast. My name is Devang Desai and I'm joined as always by Mr. Simon Bushell. Bush, how are you, sir?
Doing very well, thank you. I've had the opportunity to watch some interesting tennis matches this week. It's been a pretty wild experience, actually, getting to rewatch some old stuff that I'm pretty happy that I revisited, actually.
The French Open official YouTube account posted the highlights from that Nadal-Djokovic match in 2013. That was absolutely mad. Do you remember that, Simon? It was when Novak got the net cord violation for touching the net on a massive point in the fifth set.
How could I forget it? Also, how could I forget that I believe Djokovic was wearing Uniqlo at that point in time, and it seems very, very odd how far things have come since then. To see Roger Federer wearing the same make is very strange. How times have changed in a very short space of time.
Wearing Uniqlo and a really bad hat. The hat is terrible. But I think there is a crazy revisionist history. Like if Novak wins that match, we're looking at a completely different storyline in terms of the big three and where the major count is at. But in terms of watching old matches, I watched that and was just as entertained as I was back then. But we're going to stick with the French Open this week for our look back, and our Patreon subscriber and friend of the show, Luke Paristi, gave us a recommendation that we'll play for you now.
Hey, Devang and Simon. This is Luke, your loyal patron and Discord poster, calling in with requests for the podcast. On the next episode of the Open Era, I'd love to hear you guys discuss John Isner's win over Nicolas Mahut in the first round of the 2010 Wimbledon Championships. Nah, I'm just messing with you. But I would like to hear you guys discuss Francesca Schiavone's win in the 2010 French Open final, because it was the last time that a woman with a one-handed backhand won a Grand Slam singles title. And in today's day and age, who couldn't use a bit of the beauty of a one-handed backhand?
Simon, Francesca Schiavone, one-handed backhand. We seem to be obsessed with that shot on this show. 2010, it was an interesting time in the tennis world, but this final, nobody saw coming.
No one saw this final coming, and not least the seeds bear fruit on that one, just given these, you're not used to seeing in the world of tennis that players outside of the top 10 in terms of seeding getting to the final of major tournaments. But by the way, can we just say before everything else, with due respect to this final, thank the Lord that we're not talking about John Isner and Nicolas Mahut, because screw that. I refuse to take part in that discussion at all.
I mean, I knew it was a troll because on the Discord we talk often of how much our mutual dislike of watching John Isner play bonds us, but I thought he was kind of serious, slightly, maybe 10%, but I'm very glad that we did not do that match. I agree.
And you know the worst part is because I make it my mission when any of these rewatches to watch the whole damn thing, to watch the whole match from start to finish. From all of my sins, I don't watch the highlights package. I watch the whole thing. So if I had to watch 6 hours or whatever it is, 6-7 hours of just uninterrupted surfboarding, I'm done. That's it. Tennis podcast over.
For the rewatch this week, we had excellent Russian commentary, I believe, on the call.
My Russian improved substantially at the end of this.
I mean, I really enjoyed the devil may care attitude of talking during points. Like there was no mute button, just talking through it. I like that.
Straight through. Nothing would stop these two commentators.
What else was happening in 2010 in sport? Well, Sachin Tendulkar recorded the first double century in one-day cricket. The miracle at the Meadowlands happened, Bush. I know you love that moment.
Oh, good Lord. Making me revisit this stuff.
Simon is a Giants fan, and the Eagles came back with a Deshaun Jackson walk-off punt return touchdown. That was madness, but of course, 2010 also featured this final at Roland Garros. We're going to tackle it all right after the break. Welcome back to the Open Air Podcast. The 2010 French Open was an interesting one, to say the least, as we mentioned off the top. Now, some tournament notes to get through before we touch on the finals. Svetlana Kuznetsova was the defending champion, but she lost in the third round to Maria Karolinko. This was the last French Open appearance for four-time champion Justine Henin, who we talked about a few weeks ago. Prior to her defeat to Sam Stosur, who we're going to talk a lot about in the fourth round, Henin had won 24 matches in a row at this tournament, which is absolutely wild. This was also the Grand Slam tournament debut for future world number one and two-time Grand Slam champion Simona Halep, who Stosur also took out in this tournament in the first round. Canadian legend Daniel Nestor and his partner Nenad Zimonjic won the doubles for the men, and Rafa Nadal got revenge on Robin Soderling in the final to capture yet another French Open. Bush, this was an interesting one to think about in terms of the context of the time. I think on the women's side, this was a foreshadowing of what we might have seen in the next few years in terms of people we maybe not expect to make such massive steps in big tournaments.
Yeah, I think looking in 2010, I always try and go back to the seeding list because I think it's a really good example of where the game's at, and just seeing some of the players that are in the top 32 seeds is really quite interesting. Especially, we know that Serena's firmly placed as the number one seed, but you look at Caroline Wozniacki in 2010 being the third seed. You see Jelena Jankovic being the fourth seed, and Elena Dementieva. A lot of these players have been and gone, right? A lot of these players that we grew up with and watched so admirably in a lot of ways throughout their career, they're not there anymore. And this is a top 10, which is littered with players that have been and gone. It is amazing that the number 1 and 2 seeds, Serena Williams, Venus Williams, are basically the only players left standing out of this top 10 in terms of, with the greatest of respect to the fact that Svetlana Kuznetsova is still playing. And I believe Sam Stosur is still playing, even though she's not competing at the top end of tournaments anymore. It is incredible looking back.
I mean, Janina Wickmeyer is playing challenger events right now, and she was on the come up at that point. It is wild. You remember Dinara Safina? Just completely not recognized, even though she made a bunch of finals at the Grand Slam variety, heartbreaking finals at the French Open. It's definitely right, and it's definitely the perfect opportunity for someone like Francesca Schiavone to make a massive mark. We go through her career history. Let's just be honest here, a very tough time in finals. She lost her first 8 career finals before finally winning her first in July of 2007. Overall, throughout her career, 8-11 in finals. So that's heartbreaking. Obviously, she got over the hump eventually. But when you think of Schiavone, Bush, I think you got to talk about just the absolute incredible performance that she registered for Italy in the Fed Cup.
Yeah, I think you do. And I think she is a very divisive player in a lot of ways in terms of her overall game to a lot of the tennis community. I think people look with a great deal of respect back at what she was able to do. But I watch her in this final and think just, she looks very wiry, for lack of better phrasing. She looks a little stringy in the same way that Del Potro looked very stringy when he came back. Just sort of like you wouldn't expect there to be the power that she's able to produce. And this one's a really fascinating one to watch because I watched her growing up and I knew that she was a good player and she had some hit and miss results. I think the knock on her was that she was never going to win a Grand Slam. She was always going to be she was always not going to have quite enough game to get over the hurdle at the latter stages of Grand Slam tournaments, which makes this final really fascinating.
Schiavone, of course, employed a one-handed backhand, which is a rarity on the women's tour, to say the least. I think today, what came to mind, or who came to mind, was Carla Suarez Navarro and Tatiana Maria of Germany, who are in the top 100 and employ a one-handed backhand. But I was racking my brain trying to think of who else was using one right now, and the truth is not many are. And as I was doing some research for today's show, I dug up some quotes from Roberta Vinci, Schiavone's countrywoman, and someone who started with a two-handed backhand, when she was 18, made a switch. So at 18, she decides to go with a one-hander, and she talked about regretting it. She says, and I quote, "The one-hander is so hard. They play so strong now, but I'm 31 and I cannot change anymore." So this is someone regretting a decision she made in her teens to go to the one-hander. But I think, Bush, you and I kind of associate it with the beauty of the sport.
Yeah, and it's a tricky one to get over as well, because I think this discussion in terms of overall aesthetics, I think it probably does look a bit better. But make no mistake, a good two-handed backhand is extremely good looking to watch. It's very, very aesthetically pleasing in its own certain way. I think Felix Auger-Aliassime has a beautiful backhand. Like, it's very, very pleasing to watch. But this discussion about the one-handed and two-handed backhand, I think Vinci is right on the basis that there's so much power in the game today, especially at the junior level. And it's very hard to compete at that level if you don't have the ability to stay with that power. And by and large, when you're younger and growing up, it is a lot harder to generate the power required and to have the technical ability to hit a one-hander as powerfully as a two-hander. That's not to say that you can't hit a one-handed backhand anywhere near as hard. You can. The power level is basically around the same. You probably have a little more variety in terms of what you can hit with a one-handed backhand, but just growing up, it's a lot harder to teach a 6-year-old to hit a one-handed backhand. It's a lot harder to make a 10-year-old consistently hit a one-handed backhand, especially with the grip change that's required, especially with how challenging it is to hit high balls over and over again on that side. I speak as someone who struggles with it immensely. You have to be very, very disciplined, and you have to have exceptional hand-eye coordination to be able to pull off a one-handed backhand. But if you do, the results are incredible.
I mean, it opens up a lot of your game if you're talking about volleying, or you're talking about using the slice, which is such an important aspect of many of the things you want to do on clay. But I think you're definitely right, Bush. And I was also reading about what Patrick Mouratoglou, of course, famed tennis coach, Serena's coach, was saying about the one-hander. And he was talking about watching Simone Bolelli, another Italian, play Rafa. And Bolelli played really well. He went on straight sets, but he played well. And Mouratoglou talking about people after the match, and he says, and I quote, "I don't care about the backhand. That was not the key shot." He was talking about Bolelli's forehand was the reason he was in the match at all. But Mouratoglou rightfully saying, and I think agreeing with me a bit, in the fact that people are obsessed with the one-hander because it's beautiful, and people are touched by what they find beautiful, rather than something that maybe works a bit more efficiently. And I think those comments were in the back of my mind as I was watching this match.
No doubt as well. And I think one thing to add to this as well is that the change that really has defeated the one-handed backhand in a lot of ways and made it more challenging, although it's getting a bit of a renaissance on the men's side as we currently speak, which is really interesting, is the fact that string technology changed so much and racket technology changed enough that it caused the ball to kick up so much higher. The spin is now so difficult to deal with, especially on a clay court, and the extremes in grip that you're having to ask someone to hit when the ball is kicking up high to the backhand is so much more challenging. So you either have to be a god amongst men and a god amongst women to be able to hit the timing required so early on the baseline, like Roger Federer has done throughout his entire career, which is basically step up, have very, very little time to be able to direct the ball in any direction and still be amazing at it, or take it really late. And at that point, the thing is up in the first row of the stands. So it's really, really challenging.
Schiavone's opponent in this French Open final would be Australian Sam Stosur, who had an absolutely Herculean run to the final. Bush, I don't think we can understate how impressive this tournament really was for Sam.
She looks like the Terminator through this whole tournament. She looks like an absolute machine. And when it's working for her, it's incredible. It really is. She walks out on court with basically one idea. It's going to be, I'm going to play big, hit the living tar out of the ball, and anyone who's in my way is going to get resoundingly destroyed. And it works. And when she goes on these runs, it's really, really impressive to see.
The Stosur-Serena quarterfinal, Bush, was one of the more extremely unexpected results in terms of it looks like Stosur's going to run away with this. It's in her wheelhouse. Things are looking fine, and then she completely goes away. Serena now is up a match point in the third set, and yet we see I think two of the best games I've seen Stosur put together, and that shot making, that going for it, quote unquote, attitude is coming out in extreme aggressiveness, and I was amazed watching that match back, seeing what she did to Jankovic in the semifinal, who I think was the clear favorite maybe in that match, Bush. I think that's fair to say at the time. That was not a contest. That's 6-1, 6-2.
Look at her run. It's arguable that you will not find a more impressive run to get to the final of a Grand Slam, really, in modern history. Certainly, in 2010, to be able to beat the players that she beat, Henin on the run that she was on, and also the fact that she is still, at this point in time, despite all the injuries, a clear and decisive favorite going into any clay court match against anyone. And then Serena Williams, also to be able to just absolutely annihilate Jankovic the way that she did, is amazing. And the semi-final of a Grand Slam, to go out there and just completely and utterly wipe the ball with someone, is so impressive. And it shows when she was on, and when she managed to pocket the ball and she felt it in the way that she did, no one could hit winners like her. And the Terminator is just the best. It's so icy cold, the way that she just stands at the back of the court and blasts the ball past everyone. It's kind of, it's humbling to watch sometimes, to know that the ball is already going past you and there's nothing you can do about it.
This semifinal, or the semifinals, the Final Four, made history in many ways. I mean, we're talking about the first time since the 1979 Australian Open where none of the semifinalists had previously won a Grand Slam title. And the talk at that time, at least among the tennis pundits on ESPN and your various networks, was that out of the four of them, Schiavone was the one who had the least serious chance of winning the title. If that opens your eyes a bit, I think it's not that alarming. It's Jankovic, as who we mentioned, Dementieva, Stosur, and Schiavone. I mean, I probably would also rank Schiavone 4 there.
Certainly by the rankings, you would. It's an interesting Final Four, isn't it? It's also an interesting quarterfinal mixture as well. If you want to go one step back, is that there wasn't, outside of Serena, it was a who's who of players that were destined to never really go, or at least at the time were thought of never going the full length of winning Grand Slams. So to get to a semi-final position where you have four players who had never won a major before, it hasn't happened a huge amount, has it, in our lifetime? It's not often that you can get the chance to say that you're in the quarterfinal stages or in the semi-final stages of majors and think that we really do not know who's going to win. It's a kind of a nice thing to see. I'm kind of okay with it.
Boy, wouldn't I kill for that on the men's side one of these days.
Would be nice, wouldn't it? One day we'll see it.
I mean, the landscape might be a whole lot different after the coronavirus pandemic, or when play eventually returns. But that was one of those theories that was floating around on the internet and about, will things be much different? Probably not. But going through this tournament and looking back at when it was really anyone's game, and I think the women's tour at this time was a little less like that. I think this was a pretty big stunner in terms of who ended up where and who ended up in the position that they were in to win a Grand Slam like this. But it was an interesting match to watch, a lot of variety from both players, and we're going to get into it right after the break. We get to the match, Simon. To contrast in styles, I mentioned this a bit earlier, but is it fair to say the one-handed backhand, tend to see people who employ that have a bit more touch, a bit more dexterity when it comes to net play, when it comes to employing the slice a bit more often and changing up the strokes?
Oh, that is a tough question, Devang. That is one that you'll see debated. You mean from an aesthetic point of view or from a technical standpoint? Because you'll see forums debate for years on this one.
Right, and I'm the sample size is small because I'm specifically talking about Francesca Schiavone when I'm mentioning this here. But I think her net play and her ability to set up points was aided by the fact that she knew at net she was extremely comfortable, and Stosur's power and pace were not completely taken out of it, but kind of negated by that slice. And I think that Schiavone's one-hander was a huge role in that.
I think so as well. I think the variety that she uses in this match is, I think basically at its core, she does a tremendous job in outthinking her opponent during this final and just finding ways to win points and problem solving on court. I think one of the remarkable things looking at this match is Samantha Stosur, going into this final, she was an exceptional singles player and did eventually win a Grand Slam, but she was known as a doubles player. She, I believe, was a 3-time Grand Slam doubles player coming into this final. So her volleying should have been a lot better than what it was in this match. She does hit some good volleys as well, but my goodness, there is some trash volleying that Sam Stosur does in this match. There are some points, and nerves will play a part in it without a doubt, but there is some ropey tennis in the first set. There is some strange shot selections.
It's mind-boggling because she got into so many positions where she was the favorite to win the point, and yet a shocking mistake was made, or an aggressive unforced error was the source of her problems. So I mentioned the Serena Williams match, and you could argue that the way she played was the only way she was going to beat someone like Serena. And I think that same mentality is something that Stosur took into the final. And I'm not going to fault her for sticking with what got her there, but I think you're playing someone where you have a lot more margin for error in Schiavone, and that should change your mental outlook in terms of what you need to do. And that means not necessarily going for every line you see, which she was doing with success at the end against Serena.
Yeah, and I think she also is playing against someone who is an expert of retrieving tennis balls as well. Her defensive ability and the ability for Schiavone, such variety. And I think what really took Stosur by surprise, especially in the first set, is that Schiavone played such good rope-a-dope tennis in a lot of ways. She retrieved balls from a defensive position that usually Stosur was hitting winners from, and she made her play one more ball, and often Stosur just went too much. She just went for far too much in a position that she really shouldn't. And there was the other part of it as well, is that Schiavone is excellent at picking her spots in terms of when to volley, when to be aggressive. And when you do play so defensively and then suddenly at critical points, your opponent starts doing things that they haven't done all match, it makes things incredibly difficult for you to deal with. But I will tell you one thing. The moment that I knew Sam Stosur was in trouble is the moment I saw the sunglasses. Now, it's very, very club tennis. And this is a Grand Slam final, and I think you have to elevate your standards a little bit at this point.
Do you think Dennis Istomin would take off those glasses if he made a final? This is an honest question. I'm asking you a personal take on would Isto get rid of the glasses? There's no way. There's no chance. There's no chance. I'm going completely against you here in saluting Sam Stosur for the glasses. I thought it's a bold move. Don't let anyone see inside. You can see outside, but close the public off. Keep your game face on. Keep your mindset in. I love it. I loved it a lot. What I didn't love, Simon, though, is what happened at 4-4. Where we are in the match is 4-4. Standard beginning. I think standard in the sense that what Simon and I have just been talking about is what happened throughout the first 8 games of the match. Now we get to 4-4. Stosur is serving, and those errors, those mistakes that we have been mentioning pile up in quick succession for Stosur, who bottles a volley put away to make it love 30 for Schiavone. We see that one hand to volley combo that Francesca used so well to make it love 40. Stosur fights back to make it 30-40. Then, of course, double faults to concede the break. There's games in this match to me, Bush, that kind of serve as a microcosm for everything that went wrong for Sam on this day, and a series of 3 to 4 points going horribly wrong. It's basically what happened in terrible spots.
Yeah, I actually thought she was the better player going into this game. I thought she started better and looked stronger on her serve. I think she made more inroads in the Schiavone serve up to 4-4, and she made her work harder for points, to win points, which is maybe just a stylistic thing, but it's also just the nature of this final as well. I thought she actually settled relatively well, and then that moment at 4-4, it just completely leaves her. And There are moments in this match as well, which, as you said, which is she basically does everything. To use an analogy for another sport, she carries the ball 99 yards, puts it on the 1 yard line, and then throws an interception. It is effectively like that, and that is what happens at 4-4.
You need to go and see the volley that she deposited in the 10th row, might as well, at Love 15. When I talk about a put-away volley, this is a doubles Grand Slam champion. It's shocking, but again, who can account for nerves? Now, Schiavone serving for the set. She produces a buggy whip forehand at 15:30 that I thought was the shot of the set and maybe the shot of the match when you think about the implications for what it meant. It's 15:30. Stosur is definitely not going away easy. And back to what Mortaglu was saying about everyone obsessing over the beauty of the one-hander, but Bolelli thriving with the forehand, that was big time the case for Schiavone, who I thought had an extremely good forehand on this day, and she used it to great success.
And also using the spin to great success as well, which I think that's what that style of forehand and that overall whip that you talked about enables her to get. It's certainly not, there's different levels of forehand in terms of what you believe looks aesthetically pleasing. It doesn't look technically brilliant, but my goodness, is it effective. It wouldn't be how you get taught when you rocked up to a tennis club now in terms of what a forehand should look like, but she is really, really good at it, and it serves her incredibly well in this match.
I wonder what the teaching process is like, Bush, and I'm asking you here for some insight in terms of, are they telling people right now that you should have a certain backhand, or is it more on the player itself? Like, how do you, what age are you gauging if you should make a switch like that technically?
I think that largely depends on how quickly you're in lessons and really what your background is in a lot of ways, because you can point to many different players, even professional players who make it to the top ends of the ATP and WTA tour who do not have technically beautiful forehands or technically beautiful backhands. And I think Frances Tiafoe is a really good example of this, right? It's someone who grew up, did not have anyone really telling him what to do. He hit a ball against the wall, and it shows in a lot of ways. It's not technically what you would draw up, but it gets the result and it works. So the question is, I don't want to bring this as a point to overall like privilege and that side of things. But if you are being taught by a coach very, very early on, you are going to be taught very differently than if you grow up playing with your sisters and brothers in the street or hitting a ball against the wall or, you know, playing other sports. Maybe you play baseball, softball, or hurling or whatever it is, and you make that transition to a different sport. It's going to make the shots that you hit look very different. And I think it also depends in some ways upon who your idols are and how they hit their shots. And I'm sure there are a lot of girls growing up in Italy who saw Francesca Schiavone hitting a forehand like that and decided, you know what, I'm just going to do that as well.
100%. I remember the first time, I think I was around 13, 12, when I played someone on a public court who had training and who had been under the employ of a coach for some time. And it was an absolutely mind-altering experience because he was hitting the ball in ways I had not seen ever. And because I think on TV, it's very hard to see sometimes if someone's employing a Western grip, or like it's not an easy thing to recognize, maybe if you're not looking for it especially. And I remember playing this guy and I'm like, what is he doing? Like the spin that's coming off of this, it was a revelation. And it led me to, eventually I would take some lessons of my own, obviously not to a high level, but just seeing if you're able to do that at 10 years old, like the world is your oyster to pretty much kind of absorb how someone wants to teach you. So I think it's a very interesting thing to look at. And I think that self-teaching model that someone like TFO uses is super endearing because it reminds me of what it was like playing with my friends on the court, and seeing someone be able to do that on the pros is wild. But there is a huge divide, and I think that's the haves and the have-nots. But before we get completely derailed by this conversation, we end the set. Schiavone holds on 6-4. She's one set ahead. What now for Sam Stosur? What does she do in the second set?
Well, I think honestly the same sort of patterns hold true in the second set as well in a lot of ways, is that she's going for big things. She is sometimes hitting and sometimes missing. It's kind of just that pattern. And that is the ebbs and flows of this.
You're being generous with sometimes, Bush, but I think it's accurate. But I think the misses are like a shot to the arm in the negative way of, again, excellent position Souza is in, and yet not putting them away. That doesn't matter though. She starts well. She gets up a break early in the second set. She's up 3-1. She's cruising. It looks pretty good. It looks pretty good that we're going to get a third set at the very least. But serving at 4-2, it goes completely wrong for Stosur. She's down 15-40. She blows an inside-out forehand from a winning position. There is a theme here, of course. And another thing that I think was the game changer a bit for Schiavone was, that formula that she had been using in the first set to success was not necessarily working early in the second set. Sorry, I think Stosur had found some ways to combat it, but Schiavone did not drift too far away from the game plan. It's the kick serve wide, backhand to set up the volley winner. You could see it like clockwork, and she was imposing her will from that moment on at 4-2. I thought that might be it for Sam. Even though she came back from a mental hiccup against Serena, this might be it.
It's just that one more ball. It just completely threw Stosur off all match, where she thought she had a point won, and the ball just lands in really awkward, strange positions. Because let's not forget, when you're fully on the stretch or you're 20 feet behind the baseline or whatever it is, where, Schiavone ends up in the first row in the flower beds when she's trying to pick these balls up. How the ball comes back and some of the shots that you hit causes the ball and the spin and the placement on the court to do very, very strange things. And Stosur didn't really handle it very well. It's all very well and good. I think this is a point that gets made often, which is that so many people growing up, and you see the way that people practice, is they stand 4 feet behind the baseline and they rally and they rally and they rally. And as soon as the ball gets put in a different position, they're like, oh no, what do I do? The ball's not come back exactly where I wanted it to be. And that happens quite a lot in this match, where Schiavone dumps the ball on the service line with a bunch of side spin after she's like fully doing the splits trying to get a ball back. Stosur moves forward, tries to blast to win it, and it goes 9 feet over the baseline. It's a microcosm of sometimes players just cannot adjust to what normally their strengths are.
Multiple points in this match where the Russian commentary would say out, or like that's out, when Schiavone would hit a slice that would land on the line. It happened quite often. It was shocking. But that, I think as off as Stosur was, Schiavone just had that right amount of luck, if you want to call it that, where there was a few lines there in big spots that definitely aided her. So she gets back on serve. It's 4-4. So relatively routine service holds take us to a tiebreak where things are on serve till it gets very dicey for Stosur again, serving at 2-2. An ill-advised drop shot. I'm not quite sure if this is desperation possibly, or hoping to end a point sooner than maybe she was wise to do so, but it was a mistake from Stosur, and from there on in the tiebreak at 2-2, it's all Schiavone.
It is. Very pro-Schiavone crowd as well. Big sections, large sections of Italians who made the trip. Not very far, of course, between Italy and France. Relatively decent crowd for Stosur as well. The Aussies always travel well, especially at sporting events, but you would say probably 80-20 in terms of support for Schiavone in this final. And it shows in that point in the tiebreak. It's very much the case that trying to will the favorite daughter over the line and try and get that first Grand Slam.
I loved Schiavone jumping around after she made it 6-2. Just knowing that moment. And seeing an athlete recognize that moment is one of my favorite things, and something I miss during this pandemic is little things like that. She hasn't won yet, but she knows, and she knows that it was all worth it.
I think the match point where she eventually wins is really fitting of the match, isn't it? Is that Stosur does pretty well, and she has an opportunity to hit a winner and really, be in a position where she can win a point fairly easily, and that's not what happens. And it's probably a fairly accurate reflection of the match in its entirety, is that Stosur had opportunities, pretty big opportunities. Schiavone hung around and did enough and came up with really crucial points on big moments and won the match decisively in the end.
La palla! Francesca Schiavone vince il Roland Garros. La prima giocatrice italiana della storia.
Mangiala la terra, come hai detto, mangiala!
Ad imporsi in questo torneo che è il più grande torneo al mondo sulla terra battuta. Chi vince qui è una campionessa e Francesca campionessa è. Francesca Schiavone, italiana, è lì che dice sono proprio io. Sì, Francesca, sei tu.
I didn't prepare nothing because if I prepare something in the future, it never happens. So I say I believe. I have to say something. I always watch, I think, every final of this tournament, and I know what the big champion said. So I wanna thanks everybody, really, the people that are here in Italy to watch, and everybody, because I felt amazing today. I feel really champions, and I'm really, really happy. Thank you to everybody.
Francesca Schiavone wins her maiden Grand Slam title, defeating maiden Grand Slam finalist Sam Stosur 6-4, 7-6, 7-2 in the tiebreak to win the 2010 French Open. And an interesting quirk, this was a repeat of the 2009 first round match at the French Open. Bush, how weird is that?
Doesn't happen that often, does it? That you see two players go from really the polar ends of a tournament to have the success they do. Really actually cool moment for in terms of the progression of two players to be able to go from such early stages of a tournament to be playing for the championship. It's nice to see.
Schiavone became the first Italian woman to win a Grand Slam tournament and the first woman in the Open era to win the French Open while seated outside of the top 10. She also remains the last woman to win a Grand Slam using a one-handed backhand on the women's tour. That is cool. It's interesting. And I don't think it's going to happen again. That is my bold prediction. That is going to be the last time, Bush.
Wow, that's an incredible prediction. That's almost as bizarre as my Justine Henin prediction. Oh, sorry, my Justine Henin take.
Wait, so you think a woman is going to win a Grand Slam using a one-handed backhand? You think that's going to happen?
Sure, why not? Like it's not.
There's a cutoff here, though. If we're talking about eternity, it's possible that in like 2140, when they're playing on some sort of colony in space, that it's sure, maybe a one-hander will win again. But I'm saying in the next 10 to 15 years, I don't think we're going to see it. I'll lower it a bit.
I don't know, man. Like admittedly, there are no role models. And I know role models do play a big role, given what I said earlier in the episode about how people choose to model their game after. And it's tricky in terms of young girls growing up. There is not someone really to look up to on the women's side who has been dominant. But on the men's side, there's a ton of them who are going to be at the top of the game for a very long time and who play in very flashy, interesting ways. So it wouldn't surprise me if someone does copy the way that Denis Shapovalov hits a jumping one-handed backhand, who saw him do it live and decided that, okay, I'm going to do that as well. Like it's not impossible to see that could happen.
That's fair, but I will say I think on the men's side it is disfigured a bit by the fact that Roger exists and the fact that he probably spawned a boatload of kids that wanted to use a one-handed backhand, like your Dominic Thiems or your Tsitsipas. Tsitsipas talks about Sampras and Fed. But I don't think you have that. I think you could argue Justine Henin is an example of that on the women's side, but you had that crew of guys like that Dominic Thiem area who idolized the one-handers growing up. I think you see that less on the women's side. So I'm a little more bullish on the fact that I think a lot of tennis is about watching the people ahead of you, like you mentioned, and then watching your Serenas and your Venuses. And if you don't see that being used, you're not going to use it yourself. And it's probably not going to be coached to you, I think. I think in this day and age, you're not going to be taught if you're a junior player on the women's side to use a one-hander. Like, I just don't see it.
No, I think you're nail on the head. I think that's one of the biggest reasons that it doesn't exist is the sort of infiltration of the mindset that a two-hander is better in every conceivable way at the coaching ranks and amongst the professionalization of tennis in terms of academies and in terms of how almost the manual tennis is taught sometimes. You see so many players who appear in the men's and women's side who play identically, who just play like they have been taught from the manual exactly. This is how we produce a tennis player at the top level of the game. And it will produce really, really spectacular players who are going to be better than your average recreational player, your average just sort of to go from, top 1,000 to top 100 in the world. there's not a huge difference, but the difference is they maybe hit the ball slightly harder. They maybe mentally are slightly different, maybe slightly physically fitter, but they all, for the most part, play kind of exactly the same. They have all been taught the exact same way.
Sam Stosur hit a backhand winner against Serena late in that match. She used as a two-hander. She was way off court. An incredible shot. But the movement is so good now, and the anticipation is so good now that some of the benefits that you got from that one-hander, they're not necessarily as important now, I don't think. Bush, because I think you're seeing players slide with a two-hander. You're seeing, of course, Novak and Andy and these guys, but you're seeing people get to balls with two hands, and it's not out of the question anymore.
No, absolutely not. And that's a way that the game has changed and evolved in the last few years. I do think it touches on an interesting point, and one that I think is worthy of exploration, and I think should be examined more in the wider sporting journalism community, is that we tend to fall for players or athletes in a lot of ways, who do not play conventionally. And I think sometimes if we put more emphasis in terms of digging into how these things happen, in terms of the way in which these players and athletes grow up and do not have coaching from the age of 3, in terms of this is how you do things, this is exactly how you do things. And it would make for a slightly more interesting sporting world, I think. I mean, Steph Curry doesn't exist, right, without being slightly smaller and lighter than anyone else and having to force himself to do things that someone who is 6'7" wouldn't have to do. So we're all different in terms of our body makeup, in terms of our upbringings and everything else. Surely our tennis should reflect that as well. Like, you should play based upon how you grow up and how you learn. Like, you shouldn't all be taught the same way.
And how you like to play as well. I think
that's the big thing, right? Like, have fun with it. Like, hit shots that you want to hit. Go out and try and hit winners from ridiculous angles, because it's fun.
There's Richard Gasquet uses the example of someone who had all the talent in the world and was destined for great things, big junior player, but never really put it together for the biggest titles on the senior tour. It looked to me, and I think if he was asked if he enjoys the way he plays, I think the answer is yes. He liked playing that way. And even though it looked like he was unsheathing a sword when he took that backhand and it required a hilarious amount of time to prepare, when it comes off, that's why you watch, right? So I think playing the way you want to play is important.
To use a very nerdy video game sort of comparison on this, there's a big cool down time with Richard Gasquet's backhand. You only get one of them in a rally, otherwise. Man,
you could drink a cup of coffee as that thing is winding up. It's incredible.
One thing to point over, just to touch on Schiavone, is the following year against Li Na that she plays in the final. I think it's very telling, and it's very weird in a lot of ways. The exact same scoreline in reverse. You don't see that at all. The match goes almost the exact same way in reverse. And it's very, very strange that if you watch one match to the other, they're basically identical, but flipped over in terms of who wins.
I'm assuming Sam Stosur watched that match with her glasses on, just mumbling like, oh, come on.
Didn't see a spawning of people who grew up watching with the glasses and thought that it would be a good look. It's unfortunate, maybe. Or fortunate, maybe.
So Schiavone being part of another historic moment just 1 year later in that exact same spot. It's pretty wild. Li Na making history for China as winning a Grand Slam. That's pretty epic. Someone we don't talk about enough on this show, and we should remedy that in the future. An absolutely fascinating character in Li Na.
I believe she has a documentary coming out in China either this year. I think it's, who knows, right? In terms of what the world looks like. But I believe she has a documentary about her. I think maybe I don't know. I'm going to have to do some research. It might be a live action recreation of her entire career, which would be amazing. And I'd like to watch that, because that seems really bizarre and really odd, but I'm totally in for it.
I know you're a cricket fan, but they did that for MS Dhoni in India, like a Bollywood remake. Oh man, watch it. I was skeptical. Watch it. It's good
that sounds
stuff.
Awesome.
Did you want to touch on Mary Pierce in this trophy ceremony?
Oh, it's really weird. I never realized how tall she was. Like, she towers over everyone. She's enormous. Like, I always thought that she, was just a 5'5" woman, but she, like, the tournament director's standing next to her and she's enormous over the top of him.
Shouts to Mary Pierce. It's a way back playback. Canada's first great women's player who wasn't Canadian, I guess. I mean, she was born in Canada to an American father and a French mother. She holds citizenship for all three countries, but she ended up representing France internationally. Hey, no shame in that. Respect to her.
Hey, put it this way, Devang. When I get on the seniors tour and I'm number one in the world, which country am I
playing for
representing?
Canada? You better be, man. If you turn on us,
I think I probably am. Right?
If you do the double turn, imagine that. Also notes that Schiavone in an interview last year outlined she was diagnosed with cancer, but she was able to beat it, which is fantastic news. She's on to the next phase of her career. Sam Sulzer is still going, which is absolutely remarkable.
Didn't realize that until I think maybe at midpoint of last year, I saw her in a tournament and just thought to myself, did not know that she was still playing. Didn't know that. Thought she'd retired, but fair play to her.
She had a tough go at her at the Aussie Open at the beginning of this year, but an absolute phenomenal doubles player and quite a singles resume of her own as well. She got her one and only Grand Slam, beating Serena again in the following year at the US Open final.
Really weird rivalry that is as well. Like, just of all the players, in a lot of ways, she does play quite a lot like Serena, right? Like, she goes for everything, hits big, and when it works, my God, does it work.
I think the only way really you're going to have a chance when you play Serena Williams is to have the belief that you can play on the same stage and hit on the same stage. And I think Sam Sulzer maybe found out that formula better than most. And the formula, non-shockingly, is play out of your mind and hit every line in sight for 2 hours. I think that's pretty easy, right?
No, it's worth watching that final in 2011, just given that she is so far ahead of her. She demolishes her in the Grand Slam final, which you don't see very often.
6-2, 6-3. Like, that is a comfortable win.
That's put your slippers on and your dressing gown levels of comfort, that is.
Williams led 8-3 in head-to-head matches. But I think that's interesting. Two of the most massive wins of Sam Sulzer's career come against the GOAT. 2 slams. That's pretty phenomenal. It's always fun to look back. I mean, that's why we do these things. But I like tournaments where the unexpected happens. I like tournaments where you see someone maybe unexpectedly get that moment of shine. But I also like matches where it doesn't necessarily have to go 3 sets to be intrigued. And I appreciate Luke recommending this one because I learned a lot about the evolution of a shot maybe in the one-handed backhand and where we're at now. And I also have a lot of respect for Francesca Schiavone digging in throughout her career, performing well for her country, really battling through some tough times in terms of finals, the beginning of her career, and reaching the pinnacle of her sport at this French Open. It was cool.
I take it that means that we are going to take a look back to see Thomas Johansson's win in the 2002 Australian Open final. I'm totally down for it, by the way. If you want to do it.
I hate the court so much. Think about this. Think about the color of the Australian Open courts then, without high definition TVs, and the color of the ball. What genius put those two together? I don't understand.
It's almost impossible to see it. It's pretty awful.
With YouTube quality clips, it's mind-boggling. It's tough. It's tough. Okay, Bush, before I go on a diatribe about the color of those courts, anything else to add?
I don't think so. I think we touched on it. Very, very cool episode to do. Enjoyed seeing Schiavone win a Grand Slam title. And thank you for the recommendation. We really do appreciate it.
And the recommendations can keep going. So if you have something, a match for us to cover, an event for us that you want to look back on, please let us know. Podcast@openera.ca is the email, @openerapod on Twitter, of course. And I'm @DecidDevang. If you want to get to me individually or personally to DM me a recommendation, we are in the market for them, of course. If you can give a rating or review on iTunes or wherever you find your podcast, that would be fantastic. We really appreciate it. Of course, we are on Patreon, patreon.com/openair, $3 a month for bonus content and support us to keep making the show. We appreciate you listening to this podcast. So for Simon and myself, thank you for listening to the Open Era podcast. We'll talk to you next week.